My name is Renee Ashford. I'm 34 and I spend my working life reading the one piece of paper most people sign only a handful of times in their entire lives, a property deed. I catch forgeries for a living, not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. A signature that leans half a degree wrong, a notary seal pressed a hair too hard. So when a county recorder alert buzzed on my phone on a Tuesday morning telling me my own name had just been signed onto a deed transferring my late mother's house, I knew two things instantly, and I want to tell you both of them right now, because neither one gets resolved for a long time yet. I knew exactly which two sentences I was about to say to a room full of my family that afternoon. And I knew exactly what was sitting, unopened, in a manila envelope on my front seat that was about to tell every one of them something they didn't know I already had. Welcome back to her final chapter, where every story starts with silence and ends with power. If you've ever had someone put words in your mouth, or worse, your signature on a page, this one's for you. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. I grew up the middle child in a family that never quite trusted paperwork the way I did, in a two-story house on Ardsley Lane in Savannah that my mother, Eleanor, kept the way some people keep a museum. Clean, orderly, everything with a place. My grandmother was a notary public for 41 years, working out of a stationery shop 3 blocks from that house, and some of my earliest memories are of sitting on a wooden stool, watching her press her embossing seal into paper with the same reverence other kids' grandmothers reserved for church. A signature, she used to tell me, tapping the counter with one finger, is the one thing in the whole world nobody else can make for you, if you're paying attention. I didn't understand what she meant until I was much older. I understand it completely now. I became a title and escrow officer almost 13 years ago, first as an assistant at a small firm downtown, now as a senior officer at a regional title company that closes somewhere around 400 residential transactions a year. What I do, in plain terms, is make sure a piece of property actually legally changes hands the way everyone involved thinks it's changing hands, that the signatures are real, the notarizations are valid, the chain of title is clean, and nobody's grandmother's house gets stolen out from under her by a clerical shortcut or a bad actor with a fax machine and confidence. I've stopped exactly 6 fraudulent closings in my career. I remember every one of them by the name on the file. My quirk, if you want to call it that, is that I still sign everything: grocery lists, birthday cards, the receipt at the coffee shop, with my grandmother's flourish under the R, a little downward hook she taught me before she died, back when I was 9. My coworkers tease me about it. My assistant Priya calls it my notarial tell. It's not a tell. It's the only signature I've ever trusted, because I know exactly how it moves, every single time, the way you know your own handwriting, the way you know your own face. My mother died 14 months ago on a Sunday morning of a stroke, in the kitchen of that same house on Ardsley Lane, 3 days after our last phone call. I think about that phone call more than I think about almost anything else in my life. The alert came in at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning while I was between closings, reviewing a title commitment for a young couple buying their first duplex. It was an automated county recorder notification, the same kind of alert I set up years ago on our mother's property, back when the 3 of us were named co-heirs on the deed and I wanted to know, professionally and personally, if anything ever moved on it. I'd told myself it was just good practice. I'd never fully admitted, even to myself, that it was also the only thread I had left to that house, a way of still being connected to the peony bush by the porch, to the kitchen where she died, without having to call anyone and ask permission to care. The notification read, Instrument recorded, quitclaim deed. Grantors, Daniel R. Ashford, Whitney A. Ashford, Renee E. Ashford. My own name. On a deed I had never signed. I sat very still at my desk for almost a full minute, the way you sit still when your body understands something before your mind has caught up to it. Then I pulled the recorded document, right there on my own company's title software, the same database I use 40 times a week for other people's houses. There it was. Page 3. A signature under my name, with a flourish under the R that was almost right and completely wrong, the way a forgery always is to the one person on earth who actually knows the real one. My phone buzzed again 10 minutes later, this time with a text from my sister Whitney. Come by the house Saturday? Just us 3, want to say a proper goodbye before it's officially gone. Mom would want this. Mom would want this. She'd used that phrase on me at least 4 times over the past year, and every single time, it had meant something different than what it said. To understand what happened in that house on a Saturday afternoon in April, you have to go back almost a year, to the week after my mother's funeral, when the three of us sat at her kitchen table for the reading of her will. The will was simple. The house on Ardsley Lane, worth roughly $41,000 based on the appraisal we later commissioned, was left to the three of us equally, as tenants in common, to be sold or divided by unanimous agreement. My mother had specifically written a clause. I remember the attorney reading it aloud, and I remember my brother Daniel's jaw tightening when he heard it, requiring all three signatures, notarized, for any sale or transfer. She'd added that clause 11 years earlier, after a cousin's estate had turned into a 2-year legal war between siblings. She wanted to force us to talk to each other. She never imagined she was also building the exact obstacle someone would eventually need to fake his way around. Daniel is 38, 4 years older than me, and he'd sunk almost everything he had into a landscaping business that failed spectacularly 2 years before our mother died, leaving him roughly $61,000 in debt to 2 different lenders and a supplier who'd started sending letters with the word lien in them. He needed money, fast, and he needed it in a way that made careful appraisals and fair market timelines feel like luxuries he couldn't afford. 10 months ago, at that same kitchen table, Daniel made me an offer. He wanted to buy out my third of the house for $4,000 flat, an amount I later worked out with a calculator I didn't even need that was less than a third of the property's actual equity, so he could turn around and sell the whole house at full market value and pocket the difference before splitting anything further with Whitney. When I asked to see comparable sales in the neighborhood before agreeing to anything, he looked at me like I'd slapped him. "You're doing this to me right now? Mom's barely in the ground and you're pulling out spreadsheets?" I wasn't pulling out spreadsheets to hurt him. I was pulling them out because it's the only language I trust when the stakes are this high and because I'd watched professionally what happens to families who skip that step. I said no, not to helping him. I told him that same day I'd help him find a real estate attorney, help him explore refinancing his debt, even loan him money directly if it came to that. I said no to signing away a third of our mother's house for less than a tenth of what it was worth, no questions asked, 6 weeks after her funeral. Daniel stood up from that table and told me I'd always loved numbers more than people. Whitney, who is 30 and has spent most of her adult life gently absorbing whatever version of events Daniel hands her, agreed with him without ever quite looking at me. For 10 months, the group texts went quiet. Birthdays passed without a word. I told myself it didn't matter, that I had my job, my apartment, my life fully assembled without them. Here's the part I haven't said out loud to many people. It wasn't the money, and it was never really about the house. What I missed, more than anything, was my mother's Sunday phone calls. 40 minutes of nothing, recipes and weather and complaints about her knee. And somewhere in the silence after her funeral, my siblings became the last 2 people alive who remembered the sound of her laugh, and I lost them at exactly the moment I needed them the most. I kept the recorder alert on that house not because I suspected fraud. I kept it because it was the only way I still felt like I belonged to something that used to be ours. My coworker Priya found me still staring at my monitor 20 minutes after the alert came in, the recorded deed still open on my screen. She's the most blunt person I know, which is exactly why I trust her. Renee. Once you open that file, you cannot unopen it. You are allowed to walk into that title office as an employee and walk out as a sister who never has to see this document again, but you already know you're not going to do that. She wasn't wrong. I called our firm's compliance officer under a professional pretext, flagging a suspicious instrument, which was true, and requested a certified copy of the entire closing package, the notary journal entry, the buyer's information, everything. It landed in my inbox by lunch, and I printed it, sealed it in a manila envelope, and did not open it again until I was sitting in my car in front of my mother's house 3 days later. My best friend Camille, when I told her I was still going Saturday, was even blunter than Priya. "They forged your name on a legal document, Renee. That's not a family disagreement anymore. That's a crime." Walking back into that house with a smile on your face isn't grace, it's a setup, and you know it. I told her I knew. I went anyway, not because I believed the invitation was honest, not anymore, but because some stubborn, unfinished part of me needed to stand in that kitchen one more time before it belonged to strangers, and because I needed to look my brother in the eye and let him tell me the lie to my face before I decided what to do about it. I want to tell you what I expected walking up that driveway on Saturday. I expected 3 people, a pot of coffee, maybe a box of Mom's old photographs waiting to be divided. I expected quiet, awkward grief. What I found, from the end of the driveway, was 11 cars. A real estate sign, freshly staked into the grass, hung slightly crooked with a bright red rider zip-tied under it. Under contract. A catering table set up on the porch with a charcuterie spread that must have cost more than my mother's entire grocery budget for a month. A moving truck backed halfway up onto the lawn, its ramp resting exactly where my mother's peony bush used to sit, the one she'd planted the spring I was born, now a flattened smear of green under a tire track. And moving through the front door, in and out, in pairs, strangers in nice shoes carrying clipboards, an actual open house, mid-tour, buyers walking through my mother's rooms while a realtor in a blazer pointed at crown molding like she'd never once considered that a woman had died in the kitchen she was calling move-in ready. Just us three, Whitney had written. I counted by the time I parked at least 14 people who weren't me, my brother, or my sister. I sat in my car for almost 2 full minutes with the manila envelope on the passenger seat, the same way you sit outside a walk-in freezer bracing for the cold. Then I walked in through the open front door, past a stranger examining the crown molding in the front hallway, and found Whitney in the kitchen, arranging a bowl of lemons on the counter my mother used to roll pie dough on. She hugged me too fast and too tight, the kind of hug that's really an apology delivered without words for something she isn't planning to say out loud. I know it looks like a lot. It just kind of grew. She said it exactly the way people say things when they've rehearsed the shrug that's supposed to go with it. On the counter beside the lemons sat my mother's cracked ceramic mixing bowl, chipped along the rim from a fall 30 years ago, the one she used every Thanksgiving, already boxed for donation, a strip of masking tape across the lid reading Goodwill in Daniel's handwriting. 6 feet away, on the dining room table, sat a fresh charcuterie board with imported cheese and a bottle of Prosecco, chilling in a bucket for the buyers currently touring the master bedroom. My mother's chipped bowl in a donation box, a $60 cheese plate for strangers. I filed that contrast the way I file every operational detail, silently, completely, permanently. Then I saw the necklace, my mother's pearls, the strand my father gave her for their 20th anniversary, the one she wore to church every Sunday for the rest of her life, sitting around Whitney's neck as she smiled at a couple by the china cabinet, gesturing at the built-in shelving like the pearls were part of the staging. We kept a few personal touches in for character, I heard her tell them. My mother's pearls, worn as a prop, to help sell my mother's house to people who'd never once heard her laugh. The small comments started almost immediately, and I want to be honest that none of them, on their own, would have meant much. It was the pattern that landed. Aunt Deb, my mother's older sister who I hadn't spoken to since the funeral, squeezed my arm in the hallway and said, "You always were so uptight about paperwork, Renee, just like an accountant." She laughed like it was affection. It wasn't, quite. A man I didn't recognize, introduced to me 10 minutes later as Daniel's old business partner from the landscaping company, a heavy-set guy named Kurt with a lanyard around his neck that read Notary Public, State of Georgia in small print. I clocked instantly and filed away, said, "Must be nice, swooping in only once there's money on the table." I hadn't said a single word about money. Nobody had told me there was any on the table. Whitney, 20 minutes after that, drifting past me with a stack of paper napkins, said it without even slowing down. Mom used to say you loved contracts more than people. My mother had never said that. Not once, in 34 years. I would have remembered. Each comment landed exactly like the last, small, deniable, aimed the same direction. Renee is cold. Renee is difficult. Renee is the reason this is complicated. Nobody in that kitchen seemed to remember that 8 months earlier, difficult had simply meant asking to see a comparable sales report before signing away a third of our inheritance for 40 cents on the dollar. I stepped away from the kitchen a few minutes later, telling Whitney I wanted 5 minutes alone in Mom's study before it filled up with strangers, and she waved me off without really looking up. I want you to understand I wasn't hunting for anything. I walked into that small room off the hallway, my mother's desk, her reading chair, the smell of her hand lotion still somehow trapped in the curtains after 14 months, because I wanted 30 seconds that belonged only to me. The desk was half cleared, most of her things already boxed, but a manila folder sat open on the blotter, the kind of closing package I recognized the way a mechanic recognizes an engine by sound alone. I didn't have to dig. It was sitting right there, 3 pages deep into a stack Daniel had clearly been reviewing that morning before guests arrived. The quitclaim deed. My signature. Wrong in the way I already knew it would be wrong. A notary acknowledgement stamped and signed, not by any notary I'd ever heard of, but by a name I now recognized from a lanyard in the kitchen. Curtis J. Halbrook, Notary Public. Underneath the deed, a second document, a closing disclosure from a title company I didn't recognize, with a closing date listed for the following Monday, 2 days away, a buyer's name, a loan number. My mother's house, already legally in motion toward a stranger's ownership, on the strength of a signature I had never made, and a notarization performed, I would later confirm, by a man whose commission had lapsed 9 months earlier and who had never once been in the same room as me on the date the acknowledgement claimed. I stood in that study with my mother's hand lotion still faintly in the air and understood, completely and calmly, that my own brother had forged my name onto a felony. Stay with me, because what I did next, I decided in the amount of time it took to close that folder exactly the way I'd found it. I didn't confront anyone yet. I walked back into the kitchen with the same expression I wear when I catch a fraud flag on someone else's file at work. Pleasant, unreadable, fully operational. And I picked my coffee back up like nothing had happened, because I needed the next hour to happen on my terms, not theirs. I started asking easy questions. How's the business going, Daniel? His jaw did the thing it's done since he was 17, that half-second tightening before a lie, picking back up, slow season. I already knew from the closing disclosure sitting in that study exactly how urgently he needed this specific $41,000 to move by Monday. Whitney, whose idea was the caterer. She glanced toward Kurt without quite meaning to. Daniel wanted it to feel festive. Like closing a chapter, you know? Closing a chapter. On a house I had never agreed to sell. The realtor, a woman named Patrice in a sharp blazer, found me by the window at one point, mistaking me for another guest. Beautiful bones on this place. We had 4 offers over asking within the first week. The sellers were thrilled, moved fast, didn't want to draw it out. The sellers, plural, as if I had been in the room for a single one of those decisions. Every sentence was another brick, and I could feel the wall they'd built without me settling into place around the whole afternoon. A house sold, a closing scheduled, buyers already walking the halls with a decorator's eye, and somewhere in a filing cabinet at a title company I'd never worked with, my name on a document I'd never touched. The dessert plates were still out. Whitney had ordered a small cake that read, in pale blue icing, "Goodbye Ardsley Lane," which struck me as either deeply sentimental or deeply strange, and I never did decide which, when Daniel found the moment he'd apparently been waiting for all afternoon. He waited until most of the touring buyers had cleared out, until it was down to family and Kurt and Patrice, standing in the kitchen where my mother used to roll pie dough on a bowl now sitting in a donation box 6 feet away. He held out a pen. An actual pen, capped, extended toward me like a peace offering. "We just need you to sign the closing acknowledgement for Monday, Renee. It's basically already done. The deed's recorded, the buyers are approved, everything's moving. Mom would want this. Mom would want this. The 3rd time. I'd heard it in a text on Tuesday. I'd heard Whitney echo a version of it an hour earlier. And now here it was, delivered directly, publicly, with a pen extended toward my hand like the outcome had never been in question. I let the silence sit. 1 second. 3. 5 full seconds in a kitchen that had gone, for the first time all afternoon, completely quiet. Patrice glanced at Kurt. Kurt studied the floor. Whitney's smile started to falter at the edges, the way a smile does when it's been holding a shape for too long without support underneath it. "Mom would want this," I finally said, "is a strange thing to say about a deed with my forged signature on it, recorded 4 days ago, notarized by a man whose commission expired last July. I want to walk you through exactly what happened next, because this was the part I'd planned in a mother's study with the door half open, and I wanted every second of it to happen in the light, in front of the same people who'd spent the afternoon calling me difficult." Patrice went pale first. "I'm sorry. Forged?" She looked at Daniel, and I watched 13 years of professional instinct kick in behind her eyes, the exact instinct I have myself every time I flag a bad file. "Daniel, is this true?" I didn't wait for his answer. I pulled my phone out and called Marcus Delaney, the underwriting counsel at my own title company, a man I've worked with on exactly this kind of emergency 4 times in 13 years. I put him on speaker, right there in my mother's kitchen, in front of all of them. "Marcus, I need an emergency title hold placed on a residential closing scheduled for Monday. I'm one of 3 grantors of record, and I did not execute this deed. I read him the file number off the closing disclosure I'd photographed in the study an hour earlier. He didn't ask a single unnecessary question. That's what 13 years of trust buys you. Holds in. I'll have the underwriter call the closing attorney within the hour. Daniel's face did something I'd never seen it do before. Not anger yet. Something closer to the floor dropping out from under a man mid-step. Renee, you can't just… I already did, I said. That's kind of the point of the job. Patrice's phone rang 4 minutes later. I watched her answer it, watched her face change as her own broker explained, in real time, that the underwriter had flagged an active fraud investigation on the file and that the lender's compliance department was pulling the buyer's financing pending resolution. She hung up and said, quiet, to the room, not to me. The closing's not happening Monday. Kurt tried once, weakly, to argue his notarization was valid, that he'd simply helped Daniel out as a favor, and I watched Patrice's face shift again as she realized the man standing in the kitchen with a lanyard reading Notary Public had been performing acknowledgments on a lapsed commission. A detail that, once said out loud in front of a licensed real estate agent, could not be unsaid, could not be walked back, could not be smoothed over with another glass of Prosecco. He tried a second time to explain, something about the commission renewal being just paperwork, and Patrice cut him off flatly. That's not just paperwork. That's my license too, if I closed on this. 2 tries. 2 failures, each one a little more public than the last, in front of the exact family and the exact realtor who'd spent an afternoon deciding I was the difficult one. I looked at my brother standing in our mother's kitchen holding a pen nobody was going to use. I don't owe you a signature, I said. I never gave you one. Here is what happened in the weeks that followed, and I want to be honest that none of it felt like triumph the way I thought it might. The sale collapsed within the week. Patrice's brokerage opened an internal review. She kept her license, but the firm dropped Daniel and Whitney as clients and quietly warned the buyer's agent on the other side that the file had title complications. Language careful enough to protect everyone, and damning enough that word travels in a town the size of ours. Kurt's notary commission, already lapsed, became the subject of a state complaint I filed not out of vengeance, but because 13 years in this industry has taught me that letting an unlicensed notary walk away from a felony forgery is how the next family's house gets stolen too. I did not press criminal charges against my brother. I want to say that plainly, because it would have been well within my rights, and Camille told me flatly I'd regret not doing it. Instead, I gave him 30 days to retain an estate attorney and unwind the transaction properly, reverse the recorded deed, return the earnest money, and begin a legitimate process with a real appraisal, one where all 3 of us signed our own names or nobody signed anything at all. He did it. Slowly, resentfully, but he did it. He is, as of 3 months ago, current on a formal repayment plan for the legal costs the fraud created, and the house, my mother's house, sold 4 months later than planned, to a young family who never knew any of this happened, for $11,000 more than Daniel's rushed sale would have brought, split 3 ways, fairly, with real signatures. The quieter thing happened almost by accident. Boxing up the last of the study myself, the week before the second, honest closing, I found a card tucked inside my mother's recipe box, dated nearly 9 years before she died, in her handwriting, addressed simply for Renee when you need it. And inside, she'd written that she knew I'd always be the one who checked the fine print, the one who made everyone slow down when slowing down was the last thing they wanted to do, and that she was grateful, not annoyed, because someone in this family has to keep the rest of us honest, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. She'd signed it with her full name, in the careful, upright handwriting my grandmother had taught her, the same way my grandmother had taught me. Whitney called me 2 weeks after the second closing, not to ask for anything, for the first time in a year. She cried on the phone and told me she'd worn the pearls that day because she was scared of losing every physical piece of our mother at once, and that she was sorry she'd let Daniel's fear become her excuse. I don't know yet what our relationship looks like going forward, but it's the first honest thing anyone in my family has said to me since the funeral, and I'm choosing to let that mean something. What I learned, standing in my mother's kitchen in front of a pen nobody got to use, is that anyone can put your name on a piece of paper. Nobody can make it your signature. If someone's ever tried to move something through your life without asking for your real yes, I hope you hear this the way I finally did. The forgery only works until the one person who knows your real signature walks back into the room. That's my story. If it meant something to you, drop a comment and tell me. I read every one. And if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe to her final chapter, because there's another one waiting for you next week.